Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Hanaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who is the advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can either use the Q&A box or the chat window inside your browser. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Akhnaf, and good evening from Israel. Obviously, lots of things going on, but today really, one could argue that petty politics returned to the Knesset, to Israel. We saw something pretty much almost unprecedented in the history of the State of Israel. We saw a chairman of the Knesset Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee fired from his position. We've had only two other examples of that in history, and they were usually security or ideologically based. Why is this position so important? It's not a member of the government, but they are in charge of the body which listens to all sorts of important secret security deliberations. It also is the body which passes debates and passes drafts of laws that will then be voted on in the Knesset. As we all know, for quite a while, the issue of Haredi ultra-Orthodox enlistment or non-enlistment has been a major issue for this government, and it came to a head today. For many of this government, or specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu's opponents, they've long accused him of basically clearing political opponents or opponents of the non-enlistment law, because the law that Bibi and his Haredi partners want is a law that would enshrine the status that the ultra-Orthodox community, not just Torah learners, but all of the ultra-Orthodox community, would not have to serve in the IDF, or at least the overwhelming majority. And again, according to Netanyahu's opponents, over the last year or so, he's fired some of those obstacles who are basically pushing for greater ultra-Orthodox enlistment, whether it was the IDF Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, who basically said that, we need more people in the army, we don't have enough, especially after October 7th, with those killed, those injured, and the fact that we're fighting on multiple fronts. He was fired. Then we had Yoav Gallant, who was the defense minister, Likud defense minister, who said that, he would put out enlistment orders for the ultra-Orthodox community. He believed that we needed tens of thousands more. Both of them were removed from their position. Now, many Israelis on the left, right and centre would say that they bear some sense of responsibility for October 7th, so they had to go anyway. But neither of them were fired post-October 7th, and they were only fired when they brought up the issue of ultra-Orthodox non-enlistment and supporting the enlistment papers, or the calling up of tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox. Again, while Netanyahu and his supporters could make valid reasons that they were fired also because of their performance leading up to October 7th, or maybe even beyond that, that certainly was not true today, because Yuli Edelstein, a long-standing Likud member, who in the past has tried to take on Netanyahu for the leadership of the party, and that's why he wasn't given a ministerial position, even though he's a senior member of the Likud, but he was given the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee chair, which is probably something that Netanyahu now regrets giving him that. Basically, this issue has come to a head because no law can be passed on the enlistment issue of the ultra-Orthodox without passing through that key committee, and the chairman is the key figure there. He will basically create the drafts of the law, decide on the debate and everything, and he had felt that he created a good compromise where there will be large-scale non-enlistment by the ultra-Orthodox, but there'll be still a certain amount of enlistment within the ultra-Orthodox, and it will go up steadily and slowly, but also there'll be personal sanctions, which were very important for those who believe that there should be greater enlistment from the ultra-Orthodox, because without those, you can just put whatever numbers you want, none of them will come. But if they feel the heat from not being able to travel out of the country, not being able to get driver's license, as some of them are, not being able to get extra credits, rights and benefits because of their position, because the ultra-Orthodox get many of these, then perhaps that puts more pressure on them. These were all to be contained within Edelstein's proposed law, but the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical and political leadership were basically outraged by this. They believe that no ultra-Orthodox, learning or not, should go to the army, should do their service. And basically they had long targeted Edelstein because he was the obstacle. And today, with not too much fanfare, the Likud faction was called to meet, and it basically removed Edelstein and voted in Boaz Bismuth, who had been the ultra-Orthodox candidate. He wasn't even Netanyahu's candidate to take over. He had another candidate, but apparently the rabbis had decided last night that Boaz Bismuth is far more in their corner and will give them a far better deal than anyone else. So they even supported Boaz Bismuth over Bibi's head, and basically the vote took place today. Now, there were quite a few unprecedented things, as I said. First of all, to replace Edelstein for no particular reason, not because he did anything wrong, not because of a security issue, purely because he stood in the way of the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical and political leadership that want either complete non-enlistment or some very, very weak law without any sort of sanctions or anything really to give it teeth. The second thing we saw is, according to the Likud's own constitution, you can ask for a secret ballot if you get 10% of the membership to call for it. Now, why is a secret ballot important? Because when you're sitting there with the Prime Minister and the leader of your party, he's going to expect absolute authority and everyone should vote with him. Even though we know that there are many members of the, I think it's 36 person Likud faction, who disagree with him, especially on this issue. This is an issue which isn't even a right or left issue. There are many people who themselves have served. They have family who are serving. They may even have members of their family who've been killed or injured, and they feel that the ultra-Orthodox should do their part. But they'll say this behind closed doors. Some of them were braver ones, but really only a few will say it openly. But if there was a secret ballot, they could vote with their conscience. When it's an open ballot, then with the Prime Minister and leader of your faction sitting there, knowing how he treats any sort of dissent, you're not going to come out and be one of the dissenters. And against the Likud constitution, which says that 10% could vote for a secret ballot, even though they got more than 10% to call for a secret ballot, the secret ballot was not called. The first time in Likud history that they went against that particular part of their own constitution. The other thing, which Edelstein in his remarks during the Likud faction, he said that it's funny, in the last 2 years, the Likud faction, as opposed to every other faction which meets every single week, and the Likud should be meeting every single week, they didn't meet because of Hamas, they didn't meet because of Hezbollah, they didn't meet because of Iran, they didn't meet to pass the budget. For the first time, the Likud met just to get rid of one of their own, specifically in the service of the ultra-Orthodox. So we saw many, many strange things happen today. And even more so, Edelstein went even further, really, really getting at Netanyahu. He said, there are people in this, he said, being in the minority because he lost the vote is not a disgrace, because sometimes the minority is correct nonetheless, even though it is a minority. And he brought up something which is a real putting salt in the wounds of Netanyahu, perhaps more than anything else, is he reminded Netanyahu and all those who heard that 20 years ago, around this time, Netanyahu and Yisrael Katz and whoever else was in the Likud at the time voted and supported the disengagement. Now, why is that cutting? Because we see, the right has always said that it's the left that caused the disengagement, and we're in Gaza and everything October 7th happened because of the disengagement, and that's the fault of the left. Yuli Edelstein said something which most people remember and know, but it's certainly not said from within the Likud, that it was actually the Likud that brought about the first stages of the disengagement. It was Netanyahu himself who supported the disengagement all the way up until the last moment. And so he made quite a cutting remark, which he made sure to release to the media, that just like I was in the minority 20 years ago, even though I was in the right, I'm also in the minority today. So quite fiery remarks from Edelstein. Remains to be seen whether he will stay in the Likud as opposed to Yoav Gallant, who, when he was fired from his position as defense minister, left the Likud. The rumors are, knowing Edelstein myself, I'm assuming he's going to stay in the Likud, but I think it will be hard for him to get a good position at the next primary. So quite a lot going on. The path, to a certain extent, is now clearer for a law, but the timing is crucial here. Because the Knesset is going on summer recess next week, it won't really be coming back until September, October, after the Jewish holidays. There are suggestions today that they may well pass some sort of enlistment law there. They'll paint it as some sort of win and great compromise, but clearly it's going to be extremely heavily tilted towards the ultra-Orthodox position. And Netanyahu now is saying that he wants a year beyond that for elections. So it can be put very much in the rear view mirror, because, as I said, it's not something which he particularly wants to go on the elections on, because it's not even a popular position within his party. So, it doesn't have too many practical effects, the removal of Edelstein for now. It's more of a symbolic thing. It's something which the ultra-Orthodox, even though they claim they didn't demand it, clearly did demand it. And we'll have to see. This probably, all it does is it calms tempers in the relationship between Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox parties, but it won't mean a law at least until September, October, and we'll have to see if we're already going for elections. By then, a lot of it will depend on what is happening in Gaza. Speaking of Gaza, the optimism over the last few weeks seems to be waning and then gaining and then waning again. What's really happening is simply that Hamas have come to the table. They seem to express seriousness, but every time Israel gives an offer, they dig their heels in further. Interestingly enough, for those on the right, Netanyahu has already given 4 maps, at least maybe even a 5th map, each time making more and more compromises, each time agreeing that the IDF would remove itself even further and further from the boundaries or the lines that it holds at the moment. So Hamas at this point are basically digging in. They're even reopening issues which most of the mediators themselves, they thought it was closed, and they really, at the moment, they're trying to get more. Every time the mediators, meaning Qatar, Egypt, and even the US behind the scenes, or at the moment a little bit behind the scenes, feel that they're getting closer to an agreement, Hamas are just digging their heels in and calling for more, even though Israel has agreed to the ceasefire agreement and pretty much all the parameters. The question is, why is Hamas doing that? Well, there's 2 real reasons. First of all, what I said before, because they see Netanyahu at this point is almost desperate for the ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire. And they see that by the fact that each time they ask for something, Netanyahu appears to give in and appears to compromise further. So they're saying to themselves, well, he's obviously desperate for an agreement, let's go further and further. The second thing, just as importantly, is they're seeing the pressure on Israel. They saw yesterday 25 nations, including nations which are not overly hostile to Israel, said that there should be a ceasefire now. They're trying to put pressure on Israel. They see that there's almost zero pressure on Hamas. Hamas were barely mentioned in this communique. They see the images and the media attention on Israel and what Hamas themselves call the starvation line campaign. They basically have openly said that they are trying to put out this campaign of starvation to put pressure on Israel, and it seems to be working. And that's what's led to a lot of the condemnation on Israel over the last few days. And this basically is leaving Hamas to believe that that they can dig their heels in, because they'll get a better and better and better deal. And what Israel is trying to say to the world is, the more you condemn Israel, the more you make a ceasefire harder to get. What this means in actuality is that Steve Witkoff, who was supposedly coming to the region at some point over the next couple of days, is actually now, first of all, going to go to Rome, where he'll meet with Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer and a senior Qatari mediator. There seemed to be some confusion in the US administration where he's going to go. At one point they said somewhere near Gaza, which wasn't clear. Then there were rumors he was going to go to Qatar, because for those who want to see the pace of negotiations, first you see Witkoff go to the Qatar, then you see Derma, and then you know it's very, very imminent. It's not imminent at the moment. There are those who are saying, actually, because Hamas are digging in their heels more and more and more because of these factors that I just laid out, it seems to be a ceasefire is further away. But as I said, these things seem to change from day to day. Optimism one day, pessimism the next. But it does seem that Hamas just keep on bringing up more and more demands. Even the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, basically were embarrassed to give Hamas's latest response to the ceasefire deal back to Israel and America, because they said that they've not only did they not agree to the ceasefire, they pushed back on many of the issues which they'd already agreed to. So it doesn't seem like a ceasefire deal is happening imminently. Again, these things can change. The US is going to become more involved. There's going to be a lot more pressure from the US and even maybe some of the mediators. But at the moment, Hamas is simply digging in. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, many thanks, Ashley. We have quite a few questions, and a lot of them you already kind of answered in your remarks. We have multiple questions pertaining to Israel's PR, so I'm going to ask you two questions here. One from Carrie Hillebrand, who asks, why is Israel's public diplomacy AWOL, as daily Israel is being crucified in the Western press regarding Gaza? And then to follow up, Larry Greenberg asks, why not a PR campaign featuring freed hostage horror stories to counter the cavers in Western countries?
It's a complicated issue, and I can tell you, someone who's been involved in it for many years, it's very difficult. I'm not letting the government off that easily, but what I will say is that most of the way many people around the world receive their information is through the international media. Let's even put social media, where the numbers are, fake news is rampant, and the numbers are certainly on the pro-Palestinian side. Let's just talk about the mainstream media, which is where people get a lot of their information. It's where they, will watch on the TV at night, on New York Times, BBC, Guardian, whatever, is that Israel is putting out their side of the story. But you can't force a journalist to pick it up. Hamas are pumping out these images. They have people in Gaza. They have these stringers who are all used by every single news agency and every single newspaper around the world. And they all have some relationship with Hamas. Either they're members of Hamas, or their family and friends members of Hamas, or they know that they can't go against Hamas, or their life would be in peril, and the members of their family. So these are the people who maybe they're extremely hostile to Israel, or just because of they want to look after themselves. They are putting out these images in the service of Hamas. Hamas have called it a starvation campaign. They want to put it out as much as possible that terrible things are happening, and Israel is trying to respond. Is it doing a great job? Is it got great materials? It probably could do a bit better. But at the end of the day, I see materials that are going to hundreds, if not thousands, of journalists around the world, and they're simply not being reported on. And you can't make a journalist report on them. That's simply what's happening. Israel is the focus, whether it's the focus of the journalists on the ground or their editors back in their host countries. The fact is, Israel, people are asking Israel, why is the massacre of Jews, Jewish people being thrown off buildings, being raped and massacred? The first thing the Jewish community asked for after there was some sort of ceasefire in Syria is rape kits and morning after pills, because apparently so many women had been raped by Syrian forces and tribes loyal to the regime. Did you see anything of that in the media, in the outside media? Probably not. It's simply because it doesn't sell. It's not a story. It's not part of the narrative. We could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, and I'm not giving the government of Israel a free pass. They certainly are not doing enough, not even close. But there's only a certain amount that you can do at this point, because you can't force a story on journalists. You can't win the social media war, because simply in terms of resources, in terms of numbers, we just don't have that. So and also, unfortunately, the situation in Gaza is not great. Whether it's a famine, whether it's this, that, and the other, we can certainly have that debate. But the situation is not great. So there are images. Now, many reasonable people would say, well, that's the fault of Hamas. Hamas started this war. Hamas steal the aid. Hamas ensure that these pictures are there. They're completely to blame. That there's no ceasefire and everything else. Absolutely, there's a lot of credibility to that. But that doesn't matter when you see, an emaciated baby on the front page of a newspaper, in England or the US or France. It's simply, it's almost impossible to battle against. It's the imagery, it's the story, it's the narrative. There are many different factors. I always say, when people ask me, is it anti-Semitism? I would say you can't underplay anti-Semitism, you can't overplay anti-Semitism. It's there, it's a factor, but it's certainly not the main factor. Basically, again, I wouldn't give the government of Israel a free pass on this, but it's exceedingly difficult. The images that are being shown around the world, it's very hard to fight against that, because the image of an emaciated baby on the front page of a newspaper on the 9 o'clock news, Israel, and reasonable people will blame Hamas, but people don't care. People see children dying, emaciated children, starvation, talk of genocide, all this sort of thing. And it's very difficult to push back against that. Again, we should be doing more, but it's not as simple as just, if we got our voice out there, because the voice is largely through the mainstream media. And if the mainstream media doesn't pick up on something or leaves a big part of the story out, then there's not much you can do. We're not North Korea. We don't force the story on journalists.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Merdad Konsari asks, the IDF chief said last night that military operations against Iran are not over. What is, in your view, the motivation for such statements at this time?
First of all, it's to ensure maximum pressure on the regime. It's to basically tell them that, okay, the 12-day war is over. We did a lot of damage to your ballistic missile program, your nuclear enrichment program, but you can't just go back to start trying to enrich or start to build up your your missile program. And if necessary, Israel is basically suggesting that it will go back and it will be able to attack those sites as it did before. Let's not also forget what's going on around it. There is supposedly return to negotiations at the moment with the Europeans. I don't think the Americans at the moment are involved. And Donald Trump himself has said that he doesn't care if there are negotiations or not. At the moment, there's nothing to negotiate on because there's no nuclear enrichment program. And he has also said, if necessary, we'll go back and attack Iran. But I think it's part of a two-pronged approach, is to put maximum pressure on Iran and to show them that, if necessary, the attacks, whether from the US, Israel, or a combined attack from both, can come back. And let's not forget, we're only a few weeks away from snap-back sanctions. All of this coupled with a potential return to some level of talks. I'm not even sure if we'd call them negotiations at this point. It's really the aim of all this at this point, although I'm sure the threat is very real, is really to put pressure on Iran to come to the table, to make an agreement, to stop its enrichment program once and forever, and hopefully come to a reasonable agreement which will create greater peace and stability in the region.
All right, thank you. Now, David Levine asks, can you comment on the damage West Bank fanatics are doing to Israel's reputation vis-a-vis attacking Christian churches?
Well, this again is again any attacks by anyone, regardless of who they are, should be condemned. And there are fanatics in Judea and Samaria, Jewish Israelis, fanatics who don't just attack Palestinians, also attack the IDF. But they're a very, very small group. We're talking about dozens. This whole thing about the church basically came out because some Palestinian Christian leaders basically claimed that Israeli settlers had attacked and burnt down a historic church. And this was bought into by pretty much most of the world, including leaders in the Christian church and world leaders, and even someone as supportive as US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. What then came out is that there was no attack on the church. There was fire set nearby that didn't reach the church, and you can't demolish the church because it's basically mostly ruins. And all people who have since gone and shown photos have shown that that the church wasn't harmed in any way, shape, or form. Secondary, what we now see from the videos is the settlers, the Jewish settlers in the region, actually were those running towards the church to try and put out fires before it reached the church. We now have actual documentation of that. So it doesn't make sense that someone would start a fire and then try and put out their own fire. So we don't know. There are no cameras at the time. There's no evidence of who started the fires. It could be that it was extremist Jewish settlers, in which case, again, it should be condemned. But the church itself was not damaged in any way, shape, or form. It was certainly not demolished, as some would have it. And we don't know who started the fire. But again, we do know that there were Jewish settlers in the region, shepherds and whatever, who had wind blowers, they had extinguishers and all sorts of things trying to put out the fire. So there was a lot of jumping to conclusions. Again, that's not to say that there are no extremist fanatics amongst the settler population. There are. It's a tiny, tiny minority. And yes, they do damage Israel's reputation. But sometimes what this episode shows us that we shouldn't just jump to conclusions and not believe everything that comes out from anyone can then stir up a lot of animosity when the facts are actually the opposite.
Very interesting case in point on how a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth can even put its pants on. Now to kind of conclude here, to make up that little downtime we had, I'm going to a question from Fritz, who asks, can you talk a bit about the Druze and southern Syria?
There's quite a lot to talk about. I mean, where do you start? The Druze are. We talked about it a little bit last week, or quite a lot, I think. But the Druze are a minority population in Syria, and since the new government led by Giuliani has been, if not his direct forces, some proxy groups or groups aligned to him have been attacking minorities, whether it's Alawites, Christians, and now it's the turn of the Druze. The Druze hold a special place in Israel because they are an Arabic-speaking population. They don't like to be called Arabs, and they're certainly not Muslims, but they are Arabic-speaking, so sometimes get lumped in with the Arab community, but they are loyal Zionists. They serve in the army. They're in all sorts of parties in the Knesset, although only two at the moment. They're a very small minority, but when they were attacked, the Druze community, whether in Israel or on the Golan Heights, where the majority of them are not citizens, basically tried to join the fighting, or at least call in the Israeli government to do something, and the Israeli government did. It tried to stop the advance of Syrian forces, Arab Muslim forces, Sunni Arab Muslim forces into Druze areas, where they massacred, raped, and really did terrible, terrible things, killed hundreds of Druze, massacring. We've seen terrible, terrible images of people just being rounded up and put against a wall and shot point blank. And Israel has an interest from a moral point of view here to do something. And because it's relatively close to the area, close to Israel, it's easier for them today. They sent in humanitarian aid. They sent in medical supplies. As I said, sadly, one of the most in-demand medical supplies were rape kits and morning after pills, clearly because there were mass rapes. So Israel is doing as much as possible to try and protect the Jews from further massacres. But it's certainly complicating Israel and Syrian outreach to try and not necessarily normalize relations, but certainly move to some sort of deconfliction. But Israel, if it was suspicious of Giuliani before, it's far beyond that at this point because of what's been happening with the Jews in the last week or so.
All right, many thanks, Ashley. We have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast for this week. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us.
Thank you.
Of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please join us on Friday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time for our monthly Forum Roundtable series hosted by Lori Regan. This week's topic will be Islamism and anti-Semitism in academia. It'll be a wonderful discussion. It'll feature Middle East Forum's Sam Westrup as well. Please join us for that. I look forward to seeing you there. As always, I thank you all for your viewership, for your participation, and your support, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.